Welcome back to Fantasy 1.0. It's been a very long time and I've missed you. We're almost in football season, so welcome to your last minute draft prep kit. I didn't throw it. Did I hit you?
And yield for the apocalypse, yeah. It's the apocalypse, yeah.
Okay. All right. So next weekend, hopefully you haven't done your draft yet. That's why you're watching me. Nice to see you. I missed you. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about, next weekend, Labor Day weekend is the biggest weekend for drafts. So there's going to be a whole bunch of action going on. Hopefully you were involved in it as well. I'm going to talk about my strategies for the two major types of drafts. That's standard and auction. Okay, so let's start with standard. So first of all, let's just make the assumption that you obviously know the league settings, which is very important for your player rankings. You know the depth of your league, the number of teams, and so on. And then obviously whether or not it's a standard or auction draft. Okay, so let's start with a standard draft. Okay, so you're looking at roughly, in these typical leagues, you're looking at, let's say, one quarterback, 2 or 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, tight end, 1 or 2 flexes, and then a defense kicker, maybe some defensive players or not, but you sort of get the gist of, that's sort of what the league you're looking at. Settings, the big thing is it full point, half point PPR or regular standard? Well, I guess half point PPR is now standard, but either way, know all that stuff inside out. That's going to impact the ranking of your players. And this is what I want you to do. So let's just say that the typical draft is about 16 rounds. This is sort of how I break it out. So first of all, I used to be a big proponent of draft for value. So draft for value on players. If you see somebody that you think is going to exceed their draft value, grab them. Like for example, wide receivers this year I think are undervalued. And I think that running backs are a little bit overvalued. Not the bell cows. We only have about 8 of them. But the guys that are sort of on the fringe of that, I find are getting bumped right into the wide receiver 1 class. With the thought that if you've got all this extra value, you can then trade with your league mates throughout the year. Some leagues, you just can't trade. People are always trying to get a quick win. And it's very difficult to trade. So with that in mind, I still want you to obviously draft value, but I also want you to take a look at your starting roster and what it composes of and start to think about things like that. In other words, make sure you got you've got your 3 starting wide receivers, maybe not necessarily your wide receivers because there's a lot of depth there, but your running backs, make sure you got an RB1 and an RB2 that are pretty solid, especially with the amount of times those guys getting injured and everything like that. You want to have a solid base to build from, and then you're going to build your bench from there. So with that in mind, rounds, let's say 1 to 5 or 1 to 6, I want you to not get it wrong. That's the big thing. Don't mess it up. So try to eliminate risk. Get your good, solid players in there. They're high ceilings, but your high floors as well. Yes, there's injury considerations, right? A running back is typically probably about, I think I heard it's like 50 to 100% more likely to get injured than a wide receiver. That doesn't mean you screwed up because you drafted a guy that got injured. Now, there's some guys that are injury prone, like Leonard Fournette, which I'm going to talk about later, or maybe in another episode, but maybe you're going to want to stay away from those kind of guys or guys that could underperform. You're not really sure what you're going to get with them. So I want you to get it right on your first 6 picks. I won't want you to lose money. It's like the best stockbrokers. They say, number 1 isn't getting money. It's not losing the money you have. Don't waste the draft capital that you have on those first 6 rounds. Which brings us to the middle round. So let's say that's around, again, we're looking at maybe around 5 to 10. This is where you've got your guys. You've got and I'm going to get into this episode or the next episode. We're going to talk about, guys I like and guys I don't like in those middle rounds. You need to have those guys too, based on the league settings and based on your, what you think of these players, based on a little bit of research and your knowledge of football. Have those guys in mind. Look at who you've drafted in the first 5 to 6 rounds and look where the holes are. Hopefully you've got some balance, you've got some wide receivers, you've got some running backs. Maybe you reached for one of those tight ends, which isn't necessarily a bad idea, by the way. You know what? I'm one of the few. I got no problem with you taking Gronk as long as you're not taking him with your first 2 picks. I think that's a good pick, and that can win a league for you. But again, middle rounds, I want you can open up a little bit more risk, but I want you to pick your guys. I want you to pick the guys that you like. You're not so locked into rankings at that point because you're kind of getting a little bit later into the draft. but I want you to see where you're deficient and start to pool your draft capital in that direction. In other words, if you're like, ugh, I don't like my RB2, or I don't have an RB2, which that better not happen. You better have 2 running backs by then. You're going to want to funnel some more resources on your guys that are running backs and things like that. I'll give you some examples of some teams that I've drafted before and sort of what I did and how I shaped things in the middle rounds. Final rounds, this is where these are your dart throws. These are where you want to hit the roof with value or just miss entirely. Keep in mind that when you draft a team, day one, it always looks great. Like it's like a box that hasn't been punched in the face yet, right? Like nothing's happened yet. Your teams always look great on paper. Then guys start getting hurt and underperforming. Half of your team is not going to be on the roster by the end of the season. That's if you finish last. That's if you finish first. That's just how it is. So don't draft a guy in the last couple rounds that's this veteran that, might make a team or not. And, whoa, he's got a floor of 300, 400 yards. It's not going to get you anywhere. You need high upside. And chances are you're going to want to go after, depending again on how you draft in the early rounds, but you're going to want to have to go after wide receivers because there's a lot of depth at that position. There's a lot of young talent. Running backs at the very end of the draft are typically, an injury or something like that, or 2 injuries is going to mean that they can jump into, let's say, relevant status. You might get the odd pass catcher back there, but you're really going to be looking at wide receivers and then, a couple of the guys to fill out your roster, depending on the depth. And if it's a 2 quarterback league, totally different animal, things like that. But you're going to be looking at these high upside dart throws. You're going to want to hold on to those guys for a few weeks too, until the buys come in. And then if there's nothing happening, okay, you can start to think about dropping them. But you want to try to hold on as long as you can, especially with the bye weeks when you've obviously got longer benches because you don't have players that are on the bye and forced to be sitting on the bench. Okay, so that's just a quick rundown of standard and how I approach things. Let's get into auctions. Okay, so I've got a bit of a different view on how you should work in auctions. I think people are too conservative. I think that everyone sort of walks in with the expectation of, okay, I need to save my money, let other people spend money first. If you look at how players are dispersed by position, so you got your quarterbacks, there's your Aaron Rodgers and your Tom Brady, arguably Deshaun Watson, and then it doesn't go like this. It goes like this, right? Running backs, you've got your 8 or 10 bell cows. You got your guys that are going to be bell cows that you don't know about yet, and then you kind of have the rest. There's so many RBBCs now, running backs by committee, that the value just drops right off. Then you got wide receiver. The dispersion's kind of like this. Tight end is like this. I hope you like my little line charts for you. But what I'm trying to get at is when you have positions where there's very few talented players, and there's other positions where the dispersion goes like this, like wide receivers, throw your money at your bell cow running backs. Throw your money at your tight ends. Go nuts. Because if you have these superstar players, there's a very good chance, and you just spend a tiny bit of money on your wide receiver 2 and your wide receiver 3, you're going to be competitive. Remember, no matter what, standard or auction, half your team is going to be dropped throughout the season. You're only going to have, if that, half your starting roster by the end of the season. So jam it up. Get 4 first-round draft picks if you get the budget for it. So I had a league. Let's see how I do in it. But I have a league. It was a 2 QB league. It was three wide receivers, 2 running backs, tight end, and a flex. And I find a lot of people, they start off these auctions and they're like, and they don't, let's see how the room is and this and that. I jumped in. I ran up some prices. So I made sure that people overpaid for Lev Bell, overpaid for Todd Gurley. You've got your targets, but just look for value on quality players. I picked up David Johnson, 12-team league. I got David Johnson. I got Alvin Kamara. I got Jordan Howard as my running backs. I got OBJ as my wide receiver 1, and I got Gronk as my tight end. I can fill out the wide receivers with your Tyler Lockett's, your Cam Meredith's, the Kenny Galladay's. I can grab a ton of those guys. If 1 and 3 of them hit, I'm safe. That's my bench, all those guys. For my quarterbacks, tight end, I'm obviously safe because I got Gronk. My quarterbacks, okay, so people spent tons of money on Watson, tons of money on Rodgers. They want any sort of relevant starter. I went with floor, and I'm going to talk about this later too. A little hack with quarterbacks is if they can run, they're giving you some free points. They don't even have to necessarily be good quarterbacks. Like your, Tyrod Taylor, your Dak Prescotts, your Blake Bortles, the guys that you're like, oh, they're terrible. Ryan Tannehill, I know it sounds crazy, but in a 2 QB league, you just want guys that are going to start and guys that are going to give you a safe floor. They're not going to hurt you. And then you got all this money for all these other star players. So I got arguably 4 first-round draft picks in a standard draft in an auction. So that's what a hardcore recommendation on my part is: jam your money into 5 players. Because guess what? You don't get anything for finishing like 4th place. Maybe you do for 2nd or 3rd, but I want to be in 1st, and I don't care if I'm in 10th. So if they don't hit, they don't hit. But that's it. That's all. That's what I want to do. I want to jam all my money up front in the middle. What else do I want to talk about here? So I've talked about position nuances. So yeah, let's get into it a little bit more though. So QB1 leagues, and then sort of let's go into to stream or not to stream. So what I do is you're going to rarely see me, and a lot of expert leagues too, you are going to see the quarterbacks dropping. So Aaron Rodgers is going in round 3 right now in like typical leagues. You know, you might see in these expert leagues for money, you know, he'll go down to round 4 or round 5. And then as soon as somebody grabs him, there turns into a little bit of a run. I've got no problem with taking a decent quarterback. I used to just stream. I used to wait right to the end. Give me a Matt Ryan and give me or a Phil Rivers, and I'm fine with that, and I'll stream week to week to week. Now what I'm finding is that, you know, guys like Drew Brees and Cam Newton are available far later than I expected. Again, I don't like to overpay for quarterback, but if I can get some value there and not have to worry about streaming week after week after week after week, then I'll do it. A lot of these analysts, they look back. They look back on numbers in the past, and they go, hey, wait a minute. You know what? Top 12 quarterbacks, 6 of those guys aren't, so on a week-to-week basis, so let's say in week 3, 6 of the top 12 quarterbacks actually aren't ranked as top 12 quarterbacks. So if you can find those guys, those diamonds in the rough, let's say, week to week, based on matchup and how that team has been playing, let's say, or let's say their offense has been playing, you can hit, you know, you can stream these guys week to week to week. The theory being you're going to get a top 12 quarterback every single week. The thing is, the unexpected happens in football. You're not going to be able to predict that. You can look back on that and say it, and that's fine. But I'll tell you this, if I can get Cam Newton in like round 8, and just plug him in there every week, maybe he's got a terrible matchup against Jacksonville or something like that, and I might want to stream somebody, but probably not, because he runs anyways. So I've got that floor with him. I can set it and forget it, then give me that. So another position that's streamed often is tight end. I used to be a proponent of that as well. But the hassle and the stress, and again, it's the same argument. You're going to you can grab a garbage, you know, a dumpster fire tight end, and you can finish top 12, and it can be, you know, based on the matchup. You can look at how the other team's defense fares against tight ends and blah, 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 blah. It's great if you hit. It sucks if you miss. And you can miss and miss and miss. And tight end is getting, I find, weaker and weaker and weaker and less used as a position. So guess what? If you can get Gronk, or you can get Ertz, or you can get Kelsey, who are mainstays of their offenses. These are offensive pieces. That top 3. Anything outside of that, I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't know about Greg Olsen. I don't know about Evan Ingram this year. But those 3, if you can get those guys, and sometimes they slip a little bit. If I get Gronk as my 3rd player, depending on the league depth and things like that, like, I'm going to take it. He's the number 1 target on on a top 5 offense, let's say. Yes, he gets hurt sometimes, but it's pro football. A lot of people get hurt. If he plays 13 games, I'm still turning a huge profit. So I don't have a problem with sort of incorporating a tight end in my first 6 picks and incorporating a high-quality quarterback that has slipped into rounds 6 to 10. Yeah, so I guess you could say I'm anti-streaming. I used to be very pro-streaming, and I've changed my stance on that. And I've had some success with it too, knock on wood. Okay, so let's get into kickers. Stream kickers. If you want, you know, you could spend your second last pick on like a Gostkowski or somebody like that. If you are going to get a kicker that you think is on a high-powered offense that will probably give you, let's say, an extra 20 points a season, if that. But you predict a bump in points by having that quality kicker. Make sure that quality kicker has a bye week that is late in the season, because if he's got a bye in week 5, and you're already starting to get players injured and everything like that, you're going to be dropping that kicker that you did spend a bit of draft capital on. Personally, I find there is far too much, if you want to call it talent, but there's too much depth at kicker, right? That I'm going to stream from week to week to week, not really based on the opponent, but just really based on the offense and the quality of the kicker, because people just pick them up and drop them, pick them up and drop them, and there's always quality out there. And if you get a half decent one that's tied to a high power offense in like week 9, then you can hold on to that guy for the rest of the year if you've got the room on your bench. Defense. People overspend on defense. Keep an eye on how they're, in the league settings. Some leagues, they're more relevant than others. I see some where they flip the amount of points that these guys can generate, over the default value of the league by 2. It's still not a huge thing. I'm not going to spend a ton of draft capital on it. So what I do with defenses is I really look at, first of all, I don't draft them. And what I do is I solely base it on the opponent. So you know what I'm going to be doing this year? Who's playing against Buffalo this week? Who's playing against the Jets this week? And I'm just going to be streaming those guys. A bit of a bump if they're at home too. But you're always going to find quality defenses on the bench. Okay, so we talked about standard draft strategy. We talked about auction draft strategy. We talked about streaming versus non-streaming for quarterbacks, for tight ends, for kickers, and for defenses. We even talked a little bit about the talent dispersion by position. So that's it. That's all. Good luck drafting this week. If you've got any questions, hit me up on Twitter. I'm going to be, probably these are going to be coming out weekly throughout the football season. So if you want to talk about waivers and players to pick up week to week and injury updates and so on, these are going to be coming out once a week. So feel free to subscribe, like, ask any questions below too. All right, over and out.